Jake had been carrying this heavy secret for 3 whole months now. Every morning when he looked in the mirror while brushing his teeth, he could see the stress written all over his face. Dark circles under his eyes told the story of sleepless nights, and his wife Amy was starting to notice. At 34 years old, Jake worked as an engineer at a busy construction company downtown. His co-workers always said he was the reliable guy, the one who thought things through before speaking. But lately something was different. During lunch breaks, instead of joining the usual office chatter, Jake would sit quietly, picking at his sandwich while his mind wandered to places he wished it wouldn't go. The whole mess started with a phone call back in February. It was almost midnight when his phone buzzed on the nightstand. Amy was already asleep beside him, and Jake quickly grabbed the phone before it could wake her up. The caller ID showed his best friend's name, Tom. "Hey man, I need to talk to someone." Tom's voice sounded shaky through the phone. Jake could tell immediately that something was seriously wrong. They had been best friends since college, almost 15 years now, and Jake had never heard Tom sound this upset. What Tom told him that night changed everything. Tom confessed that he had been seeing another woman behind his wife's back. Not just a one-time mistake, but an ongoing situation that had been going on for months. Tom was crying on the phone, saying he felt terrible but didn't know how to stop. He begged Jake not to tell anyone, especially not Amy, because Amy and Tom's wife Lisa were practically sisters. Jake felt like someone had punched him in the stomach. Lisa was one of the sweetest people he knew. She and Amy had been best friends since high school, and over the years she had become like family to Jake too. The four of them spent almost every weekend together, grilling in the backyard, watching movies, planning vacation trips. Lisa always brought homemade cookies to their gatherings and remembered everyone's birthdays. After hanging up that night, Jake lay awake until sunrise, staring at the ceiling. He kept thinking about Lisa's bright smile and how she always talked, about how lucky she was to have Tom. Just last month she had been showing Amy pictures on her phone, planning their 10th wedding anniversary celebration. She was so excited about the surprise party she was organizing for Tom. The next few weeks were torture for Jake. Every time the four of them got together, he found himself studying Tom's face, looking for signs of guilt or regret. But Tom acted completely normal, laughing at jokes, putting his arm around Lisa, playing the role of the loving husband perfectly. It made Jake feel sick to his stomach. Amy started noticing that Jake was acting strange. During their usual morning coffee routine, she would catch him staring out the kitchen window with a distant look in his eyes. When she asked what he was thinking about, he would just mumble something about work problems and change the subject. "You've been really quiet lately," Amy said one evening while they were washing dishes together. "Is everything okay at the office?" Jake forced a smile and handed her a plate to dry. "Just some stressful projects coming up, nothing major." But it wasn't nothing major. The secret was eating him alive from the inside. He found himself making excuses to avoid their usual double dates. When Amy suggested they all go camping together like they did every spring, Jake said he was too busy with work. When Lisa called to invite them to a barbecue, Jake suddenly remembered he had promised to help his brother move that same weekend. Amy wasn't buying his excuses anymore. She knew her husband better than anyone, and she could tell when something was bothering him. They had built their 7-year marriage on honesty and trust. They told each other everything, shared every worry and every joy. This wall that Jake had put up between them was completely unlike him. The worst part was watching Lisa suffer without knowing why. During their weekly coffee dates, Amy would come home and tell Jake how worried she was about her best friend. Lisa had been feeling like something was wrong in her marriage, but she couldn't put her finger on what it was. She told Amy that Tom seemed distant lately, always working late or going out with his buddies more than usual. "She keeps asking me if I think she's being paranoid," Amy said one night while getting ready for bed. She says she feels like Tom is hiding something from her, but then she feels guilty for not trusting him. Jake felt like his heart was being squeezed in a vice. Here was Lisa, with perfect instincts about her situation, but everyone around her was telling her she was imagining things. And Jake was part of that lie every time he stayed silent. 3 months passed this way. 3 months of Jake carrying this burden alone, watching his marriage suffer because of his silence, watching Lisa doubt her own instincts while living with a lie. The stress was affecting everything in his life. His work performance started slipping because he couldn't concentrate during meetings. His boss even pulled him aside to ask if everything was all right at home. The breaking point came on a Thursday evening in May. Jake was sitting at their dining room table, pretending to read some work documents, but really just listening to Amy's phone conversation with Lisa. Amy had put the call on speaker thinking Jake wasn't paying attention, and Lisa's voice filled their quiet house. Lisa was crying, not just a few tears, but the kind of deep, heartbroken sobs that come from months of confusion and pain. She told Amy that she felt like she was losing her mind, that she loved Tom so much but couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong between them. "I keep thinking maybe it's me," Lisa sobbed through the phone. "Maybe I'm not being a good enough wife. Maybe I'm being too needy or suspicious. But Amy, I feel so alone in my own marriage. I don't know what to do anymore." Amy's eyes filled with tears as she tried to comfort her best friend. "Lisa, honey, you're an amazing wife. Maybe Tom is just going through something stressful at work. You know how men can be when they're dealing with problems." Jake watched his wife lie to her best friend, trying to comfort her with false hope, and something inside his chest finally cracked. The weight of his silence had become unbearable. He couldn't watch Lisa tear herself apart any longer, and he couldn't keep poisoning his own marriage with this terrible secret. When Amy hung up the phone, she turned to Jake with tears streaming down her face. "I hate seeing her like this," she whispered. "She's such a good person. She doesn't deserve to feel this way. I wish there was something I could do to help her." Looking at his wife's compassionate face, seeing how much she cared about her friend's pain, Jake knew he had reached the end of his rope. The secret that had been slowly destroying his peace of mind for 3 months was about to change everything. The next evening, Jake couldn't sit still. He had barely touched his dinner, pushing the food around his plate while his mind raced with thoughts he couldn't organize. Amy noticed his restlessness but didn't push him to talk. She had learned, over the years, that when Jake was wrestling with something big, he needed space to work through it on his own first. After dinner, Jake wandered out to their backyard. The evening air was cool and the smell of blooming flowers from Amy's garden usually calmed him down. But tonight, nothing could quiet the storm in his head. He had made a decision during those long, sleepless hours the night before. But actually, following through felt like standing at the edge of a cliff. He pulled out his phone and stared at Tom's number for a long time. His thumb hovered over the call button. Maybe he could give Tom one more chance to do the right thing. Maybe he could convince his friend to tell Lisa the truth himself. It would be so much better coming from Tom than from him. Jake pressed the call button before he could change his mind. "Hey, what's up?" Tom answered on the third ring, sounding casual and relaxed, like he didn't have a care in the world. "Tom, we need to talk about Lisa," Jake said, trying to keep his voice steady. There was a pause on the other end. When Tom spoke again, his tone had completely changed. "Jake, I thought we already discussed this. I told you I'd handle it when the time was right. It's been 3 months, man. 3 months. And Lisa is falling apart. She knows something's wrong, but she's blaming herself. She thinks she's going crazy." Tom's voice got sharp and defensive. "Look, I appreciate your concern, but this is between me and my wife. I know what I'm doing." Jake felt his patience snap. "Do you? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're just making everything worse. Lisa is suffering, Amy is suffering, watching her best friend in pain, and I'm stuck in the middle of this mess." "Nobody asked you to get involved," Tom shot back. "I told you something in confidence because I thought you were my friend. I thought I could trust you." The word trust hit Jake like a slap in the face. "Trust? What about Lisa trusting you? What about Amy trusting me to be honest with her? I've been lying to my wife for 3 months because of your secret." Tom was quiet for a moment. Then his voice turned cold. "If you say anything to anyone, Jake, our friendship is over. I mean it. 15 years down the drain, and don't think Amy won't be affected too. This will destroy both our marriages, not just mine." The line went dead. Jake stood there holding his phone, feeling like he'd been punched in the gut. Tom's threat echoed in his mind. Was he right? Would telling the truth destroy everything they had all built together? Jake walked over to the rose bushes Amy had planted when they first moved into the house. She was so proud of that garden, spending hours every weekend tending to it, talking about how she wanted to create something beautiful they could enjoy for years to come. Just like their friendships, just like their marriage. Everything took time and care to grow, but it could all be destroyed so quickly. He was still standing there 20 minutes later when he heard the back door open. Amy stepped onto the patio carrying 2 cups of tea. She handed him one without saying anything and stood beside him, looking out at the garden in the fading light. They stood in comfortable silence for a while. This was one of the things Jake loved most about Amy. She never pushed or demanded explanations. She just made herself available and waited for him to be ready to share whatever was troubling him. "Amy," Jake finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "What would you do if you knew something that would hurt someone you care about, but keeping it secret might hurt them even more?" Amy turned to look at him, studying his face in the dim light from their kitchen window. She didn't answer right away, and Jake could almost see her mind working, putting pieces together. "Is this about Lisa?" she asked gently. The question hit him like a physical blow. Of course she had figured it out. Amy had always been able to read people, especially him. She knew his moods, his habits, his tells. The timing of his strange behavior, his sudden reluctance to spend time with Tom and Lisa, his obvious distress after Lisa's phone calls, it all pointed in one direction. Jake felt his shoulders sag with the weight of months of carrying this burden alone. He nodded, not trusting his voice to stay steady if he tried to speak. Amy set down her teacup and moved closer to him. "Jake, whatever it is, we're supposed to face these things together. That's what marriage means, right? We don't carry heavy burdens alone." Jake looked at his wife, really looked at her. In the growing darkness of their backyard, he could see the concern in her eyes, but also something else: determination. Amy had always been the stronger one when it came to making difficult decisions. She saw situations clearly without all the doubt and second-guessing that usually paralyzed him. "Lisa is my best friend," Amy continued, her voice soft but firm. "She's like a sister to me. If something is happening that affects her, I need to know. Not because I'm nosy or want to get involved in drama, but because I love her. And I love you. And I can see that keeping this secret is tearing you apart." Jake felt tears prick at his eyes. For 3 months, he had felt completely alone with this terrible knowledge. But Amy was right. They were supposed to be a team. They had promised each other on their wedding day that they would face life's challenges together, and he had been breaking that promise by shutting her out. "If I tell you," Jake said quietly, "there's no going back. Once you know, you'll have to carry this weight too, and it might destroy our friendship with Tom and Lisa forever." Amy reached up and placed her hand on his cheek, the gesture so familiar and comforting that Jake felt some of the tension leave his body. "Jake, look at me," she said, waiting until his eyes met hers. "We've been married for 7 years. In all that time, have I ever made you regret trusting me with something important?" Jake shook his head. Amy had always been his safe harbor, the person he could tell anything to without fear of judgment or betrayal. Amy's voice dropped to almost a whisper, but her words were clear and strong. "Then do it now. Tell me. Whatever it is, we'll figure out what to do together." Jake looked into his wife's eyes, seeing the same steady courage that had made him fall in love with her in the first place. In that moment, standing in their garden with the weight of friendship and loyalty and truth all pulling him in different directions, he made his choice. His answer didn't come in words. Instead, his shoulders finally relaxed for the first time. In 3 months, he took a deep breath and nodded. "Okay," he whispered back. "Okay." The conversation happened 2 days later on Saturday morning. Jake and Amy had spent Friday night planning exactly how they would approach Lisa. They decided to invite her over for coffee while Tom was out playing his weekly basketball game with the guys. It seemed like the kindest way to handle such a difficult situation. But when Lisa arrived at their front door that morning, she looked terrible. Her usually bright eyes were red and puffy from crying, and she had dark circles that showed she hadn't been sleeping well. She was wearing an old sweatshirt and her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, so unlike the Lisa who usually took pride in looking put together. "I'm sorry I look like such a mess," Lisa said as Amy hugged her at the door. "I barely slept last night. Tom came home really late again, and when I asked him where he'd been, he got so angry with me. He said I was being paranoid and controlling." Jake felt his stomach twist into knots. Here was Lisa, apologizing for looking upset when she had every right to be falling apart. Tom was not only betraying her but making her feel guilty for having normal concerns about her husband's behavior. They all sat down in the living room and Amy poured coffee from the pot she had prepared earlier. Jake watched Lisa wrap her hands around the warm mug like she was trying to absorb some comfort from it. She looked so fragile, so different from the confident, happy woman they had known for years. "Lisa," Amy said gently, "we asked you to come over because we have something important to tell you." Lisa looked up with a mixture of hope and fear in her eyes. "Is it about Tom?" Jake took a deep breath. This was it. The moment that would change everything. He looked at Lisa, this woman who had been like family to them for so many years, who had celebrated their birthdays and holidays, who had been there for them through good times and bad times. "Yes," Jake said quietly. "It's about Tom." What happened next was one of the hardest hours of Jake's life. He told Lisa everything he knew, starting with that midnight phone call 3 months ago. He was careful with his words, trying to be honest, but also gentle. He explained how Tom had sworn him to secrecy, how he had struggled with keeping the information to himself, and how he finally couldn't watch her suffer any longer without knowing the truth. Lisa listened without interrupting. At first she went very still, like she was holding her breath. Then the tears started, not the dramatic sobbing Jake might have expected, but quiet tears that rolled down her cheeks while she stared at her coffee mug. When Jake finished talking, the room was silent except for the sound of the clock ticking on the wall. Lisa sat there for what felt like forever, processing everything she had just learned. Finally, she looked up at Jake with an expression he couldn't quite read. "I knew it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I mean, I didn't want to know it, but somewhere deep down I knew something like this was happening." Amy moved closer to Lisa on the couch and took her hand. "I'm so sorry, honey. I can't imagine how you must be feeling right now." Lisa squeezed Amy's hand and gave her a sad smile. "You know what the worst part is? For months I've been feeling like I was going crazy. Tom would come home late and I'd ask him about it, and he'd make me feel like I was being unreasonable. He'd say things like, 'Don't you trust me, and why are you being so paranoid?' And I started believing that maybe I was the problem." Jake felt sick hearing this. Not only had Tom been betraying Lisa, but he had been manipulating her into doubting her own instincts. He had been making her feel guilty for noticing that something was wrong in her own marriage. "Lisa, you weren't being paranoid," Amy said, firmly. "Your instincts were right. You were picking up on real changes in his behavior." Lisa nodded, wiping her eyes with the tissue Amy handed her. "Thank you for telling me the truth, Jake. I know it must have been really hard for you, and I know it probably cost you your friendship with Tom." Jake hadn't even thought about that yet, but Lisa was right. Tom had made it clear that their friendship would be over if Jake said anything. 15 years of friendship, all those memories, all those shared experiences, all those plans they had made for the future. It was all gone now. As if reading his thoughts, Lisa continued, "I'm sorry that you got put in the middle of this. It wasn't fair of Tom to make you keep his secret. Real friends don't put each other in impossible situations like that." Over the next hour, Lisa made some phone calls. She called her sister and asked if she could stay there for a while. She called her boss and asked for a few days off work. She was handling everything with a calmness that surprised both Jake and Amy. "I need to go home and pack some things before Tom gets back from basketball," Lisa said, standing up from the couch. I don't want to have this conversation with him until I've had time to process everything and decide what I want to do, Amy offered to go with her, but Lisa shook her head. I need to do this part alone, but thank you both, really. I know this was hard for you too. After Lisa left, Jake and Amy sat in their quiet living room, both feeling emotionally drained. The house felt different somehow, like something fundamental had shifted. How are you feeling? Amy asked, curling up next to Jake on the couch. Jake thought about the question. He felt relieved that the secret was finally out in the open, but he also felt scared about what would happen next. Their whole social life had revolved around their friendship with Tom and Lisa, their weekend plans, their vacation trips, their holiday celebrations. Everything was going to change now. I keep thinking about Tom, Jake admitted. I know he's angry with me, and I know he's probably going to hate me forever. But I also can't help thinking that maybe this needed to happen. Lisa deserved to know the truth, Amy nodded. She did deserve to know, and you did the right thing even though it was hard. By Sunday evening, the news had spread through their friend group like wildfire. Tom had come home from basketball to find Lisa gone and a note explaining that she knew about his affair. He had immediately called Jake, and the conversation had been even uglier than Jake expected. Tom accused Jake of destroying his marriage and betraying their friendship. He said Jake was self-righteous and judgmental, and that he had no right to interfere in other people's relationships. The call ended with Tom saying he never wanted to see Jake again, but the drama didn't stop there. Their mutual friends were quickly forced to choose sides. Some people thought Jake had done the right thing by telling Lisa the truth. Others felt that he had violated Tom's trust and overstepped his boundaries. Within a week, their usual friend group had completely fractured. The couples who normally got together for barbecues and game nights were now awkwardly trying to figure out who to invite to what events. Some friends stopped calling Jake and Amy altogether, apparently deciding that they didn't want to get involved in the drama. Amy was handling the social fallout better than Jake expected, but he could see that it was affecting her too. She had been friends with these people for years, and losing those relationships was painful, even when she believed they had made the right choice. Do you regret it? Amy asked him one night as they were getting ready for bed. Knowing what it's cost us, do you wish you had kept Tom's secret? Jake thought about Lisa's face when she said, "Thank you for telling me the truth." He thought about how relieved she had looked to finally have answers instead of just suspicions and self-doubt. No, he said, and he meant it. I don't regret it. It was the right thing to do. 2 months had passed since Jake told Lisa the truth about her husband, and life had settled into a new, quieter routine. The phone calls from angry friends had stopped. The awkward encounters at the grocery store had become less frequent. But Jake still felt the weight of what had happened, especially during the long evenings when he and Amy found themselves alone more often than they ever had before. Their social calendar, once packed with dinner parties and group outings, now had big empty spaces. Saturday nights that used to be filled with laughter and conversation at Tom and Lisa's house were now spent at home, watching movies or reading books. Jake didn't mind the quiet, but he could see that Amy missed the energy of their old friend group. Then, on a Tuesday morning while Jake was getting ready for work, his phone rang. When he saw Lisa's name on the screen, his heart started beating faster. They hadn't talked much since that difficult morning in their living room, though Amy had been in touch with her regularly. "Hi, Jake." Lisa's voice sounded different, stronger, somehow more confident than he remembered. "Do you have a few minutes to talk?" Jake sat down on the edge of his bed, suddenly nervous. "Of course, how are you doing?" "That's actually why I'm calling," Lisa said. "I wanted to thank you properly for what you did. I know we talked about it that day, but I don't think I really understood then how much you saved me from." Jake wasn't sure what to say. Over the past 2 months, he had replayed that morning 1,000 times in his head, wondering if he had done the right thing, if there might have been a better way to handle the situation. Lisa continued, "Jake, I need you to know something. After I moved out and started going through our financial records for the divorce, I discovered things that made me realize Tom's affair wasn't his first one." Jake felt like someone had punched him in the stomach. "What do you mean?" I found credit card statements going back 3 years, expensive dinners at restaurants I'd never been to, hotel charges when he was supposed to be at work conferences, gifts that never came home to me. Lisa's voice was steady, but Jake could hear the pain underneath. I think there were at least 2 other women before this most recent one. Jake closed his eyes, feeling sick. All this time he had thought he was just dealing with one terrible mistake his friend had made, but it was so much worse than that. There's more, Lisa said quietly. I also found out that Tom had been lying about our finances. We're in debt, serious debt that I didn't know about. He had been using our credit cards to fund these affairs, and he had even taken money out of my retirement account without telling me. The room felt like it was spinning around Jake. He had thought he was just choosing between honesty and loyalty to a friend. He hadn't realized he might be saving Lisa from years of additional betrayal and financial ruin. Lisa, I'm so sorry, Jake managed to say. I had no idea it was that bad. That's exactly my point, Lisa said, and now her voice was getting stronger. If you hadn't told me the truth when you did, I could have spent years more living in denial. I might have ended up completely broke and emotionally destroyed. You gave me the chance to get out while I can still rebuild my life. After they hung up, Jake sat in his bedroom for a long time, trying to process what Lisa had told him. The phone call changed everything about how he viewed the past 2 months. What had felt like a terrible destruction of friendships now seemed like a rescue mission he hadn't even known he was conducting. But even with this new perspective, the personal costs kept piling up. That very evening, Jake found out he had been quietly removed from the men's poker group that he had been part of for 5 years. One of the guys, Kevin, called to let him know that Tom had convinced the others that Jake couldn't be trusted with private information. I'm sorry, man, Kevin said, and he sounded like he genuinely meant it. I don't necessarily agree with what they're doing, but the group voted and I got outnumbered. Tom's been telling everyone that you betrayed his confidence, and the guys are worried about what they say around you now. Jake felt the loss more than he expected. Those weekly poker games had been his main social outlet outside of the couple friends he shared with Amy. It was where he went to relax, to laugh, with the guys, to forget about work stress for a few hours. Now that was gone too. The isolation was hardest on Amy, who had always been more social than Jake. She tried to hide it, but Jake could see her scrolling through social media, looking at pictures from gatherings they hadn't been invited to. Their old friends were still meeting for book club, still having their monthly trivia nights at the local bar, still planning group vacations, but Jake and Amy were no longer part of any of it. Amy never complained, but Jake could see the loneliness in her eyes. She had given up her social life to support his decision, and the guilt was eating him alive. The stress started affecting Jake's work too. He found himself making mistakes on projects that should have been routine. During team meetings, he had trouble concentrating on the discussions. His mind would wander to thoughts of Tom, of Lisa, of all the friends who no longer wanted anything to do with them. His boss, Mr. Rodriguez, noticed the change and asked Jake to stay after work one Friday afternoon. Jake, you've been one of my most reliable engineers for 3 years, Mr. Rodriguez said, closing his office door behind them. But lately, I've noticed you seem distracted. Your work is still good, but it's not at the level I'm used to seeing from you. Is everything okay at home? Jake appreciated that his boss cared enough to ask, but he didn't know how to explain that his personal life had imploded because of a moral choice he'd made. How do you tell your boss that you're struggling at work because you destroyed your social circle by telling an uncomfortable truth? Just some personal stuff I'm working through, Jake said. I'm sorry if it's affected my performance. I'll do better. Mr. Rodriguez studied Jake's face for a moment. Look, if you need to talk to someone, the company has a counseling program. Sometimes it helps to get an outside perspective on personal problems. 3 months after the revelation, Jake hit his lowest point. He was sitting in his car in the office parking lot after a particularly difficult day, and he just broke down crying. He called Amy, barely able to speak through his tears. Maybe Tom was right, he sobbed into the phone. Maybe I should have minded my own business. Look what I've done to us. Look what I've done to our life. Amy's response was immediate and fierce. Jake, stop. Stop right now. You did the right thing. I have never been more proud to be married to you than I am right now. But we've lost everything, Jake said. Our friends, our social life, everything we built. We lost people who weren't really our friends, Amy said firmly. Real friends don't abandon you for doing the right thing. Real friends don't choose sides based on who tells the most comfortable lies. Jake wiped his eyes, listening to his wife's strong, clear voice through the phone. We're going to be okay, Amy continued. We're going to find new friends, better friends, people who value honesty and integrity. It might take time, but we'll rebuild everything, and it'll be stronger than what we had before. That night, as Jake and Amy sat together on their couch, Amy curled up against his side, he realized something important. Through all the loss and isolation and social drama, his marriage had actually gotten stronger. They had faced this crisis together, made difficult choices together, and supported each other through the consequences. I love you, Jake said quietly, kissing the top of Amy's head. I love you too, she replied. And I'm proud of us. We chose truth over convenience, and that matters more than anything else. 1 year later, Jake stood in a backyard he had never seen before, watching Amy laugh with a group of women he was still getting to know. The sound of her genuine laughter made his heart feel light in a way it hadn't for months after everything had happened with Tom and Lisa. This was Lisa's new house, a charming little place with a big garden that she had bought all by herself. The changes in Lisa over the past year had been remarkable. When Jake looked at her now, hosting this housewarming party with confidence and joy, he could barely recognize the broken woman who had sat in their living room crying over her failed marriage. Lisa had cut her hair shorter, and she had a glow about her that Jake realized had been missing for years, probably long before he had even known about Tom's affairs. Jake! Lisa called out from across the yard, waving him over to where she was standing with a small group of people. Come meet my nursing school classmates. Nursing school. That had been one of the biggest surprises of the year. Lisa had enrolled in a program to finish the nursing degree she had started, but never completed when she married Tom. She talked about it with an excitement that was infectious, describing how much she loved learning about patient care and how meaningful it felt to be working toward a career that really mattered to her. As Jake walked over to join the group, he thought about all the ways Lisa's life had transformed. The divorce had been finalized 6 months ago, and instead of being devastated, Lisa seemed to have found herself in the process. She had discovered that she was stronger than she ever knew, more capable of independence than she had imagined. These are my friends Jake and Amy, Lisa was saying to her classmates. They're the ones I told you about, the ones who had the courage to tell me the truth when I needed to hear it most. Jake felt his cheeks get warm. Even a year later, he still wasn't comfortable being called courageous. What he had done had felt more like desperation than bravery, but he was beginning to understand that sometimes courage and desperation looked pretty much the same from the outside. The nursing students were friendly, asking Jake about his work and sharing stories about their clinical rotations at the local hospital. These were people who had chosen a career based on helping others, and their conversation reflected that same caring attitude toward life in general. Jake found himself relaxing in a way he hadn't with new people in a long time. Amy appeared at his side, carrying 2 glasses of lemonade. Having a good time, she asked, and Jake could see that she genuinely was. Her face had the same relaxed happiness that had been missing during those difficult months when their social world had collapsed. Yeah, I really am, Jake realized with some surprise. These seem like really good people. They are, Amy agreed. Lisa has great instincts about people. I think she always did, but maybe now she trusts herself to act on them. Over the past year, Amy and Lisa's friendship had not only survived, but had grown deeper. They had supported each other through the awkwardness of losing their old friend group and the challenge of building new relationships. In the process, they had developed a bond based on authenticity rather than just shared history and convenience. Jake looked around the backyard at the mix of people Lisa had invited. There were her nursing school friends, some colleagues from the part-time job she had taken while in school, neighbors from her new street, and a few relatives. But there were also some unexpected faces. people from Jake and Amy's new social circle. Over the months, they had gradually connected with new friends in ways Jake hadn't expected. There was Kevin from the old poker group, who had reached out, privately to say he disagreed with how Jake had been treated. Kevin and his wife Rachel had started having dinner with Jake and Amy every few weeks, and those conversations had been some of the most honest and meaningful Jake had ever had with friends. There was also Alex and Chris, a couple they had met. At a volunteer event Amy had suggested they try. Amy had thought that doing community service together might help them feel less isolated and give them a chance to meet people who shared their values. She had been right. Alex and Chris had become close friends, the kind of people Jake felt comfortable being completely honest with. The new friend group was smaller than their old one, but the relationships felt more genuine. When they got together for dinner or game nights, the conversations went deeper than sports and weather and work complaints. There was an understanding among them that honesty, even when it was difficult, was valued over politeness and keeping up appearances. Jake's work life had also improved dramatically once he stopped carrying the stress of his personal situation. His boss had noticed the change and had even complimented Jake on some recent projects. The company counseling program had helped too, giving Jake a safe space to work through his feelings about the friendship he had lost and the choices he had made. "You know what I keep thinking about?" Amy said, interrupting Jake's thoughts. "What?" "That night in our backyard when I told you to do it now? I keep wondering what would have happened if we had chosen differently. If you had kept Tom's secret." Jake considered the question seriously. Lisa would still be married to him. She'd probably be in even worse financial shape by now. She definitely wouldn't have gone back to school or bought this house or found out what she was really capable of. Amy nodded. And we'd still be having those surface-level friendships with people who valued comfort over truth. We'd still be pretending that everything was fine while watching our friend live a lie. Jake thought about Tom, who he still hadn't heard from since that angry phone call over a year ago. Through mutual acquaintances, he had learned that Tom had married the woman he had been having the affair with, but the marriage had already ended in divorce. Apparently, Tom had repeated the same patterns of deception and betrayal. Jake felt sad for his former friend, but not guilty. Tom's choices were his own responsibility. As the sun began to set over Lisa's new backyard, she asked everyone to gather around for a toast. She stood on her back porch holding a glass of sparkling cider, looking out at the group of people who had become her chosen family. "A year ago," Lisa began, her voice clear and strong, "I thought my life was falling apart. I felt lost and confused and scared about the future. But I learned something important during that time. Sometimes what feels like an ending is actually a beginning." She looked directly at Jake and Amy. "I learned that true friends are the ones who tell you the truth even when it's hard to hear. They're the ones who stand by you through the difficult consequences of that truth. And they're the ones who help you rebuild something better from the pieces." Lisa raised her glass higher. "So here's to new beginnings, to authentic friendships, to having the courage to face difficult truths, and to the amazing things that can grow from honest ground." Everyone raised their glasses and Jake felt a warmth spread through his chest that had nothing to do with the evening sunshine. As he looked around at the faces of people who had chosen to be there, people who had chosen authenticity over convenience, he realized that Amy had been right all along. They had lost their old life, but they had gained something more valuable, a life built on truth, integrity, and genuine relationships. The path had been difficult and painful at times, but it had led them exactly where they needed to be. Later that evening, as Jake and Amy walked hand in hand to their car, Amy squeezed his fingers. "Any regrets?" she asked, echoing the question she had posed during their darkest moments a year ago. Jake looked back at Lisa's house, warm light glowing from the windows, the sound of laughter still floating from the backyard where a few friends lingered to help clean up. He thought about the year they had been through, the friendships they had lost, the difficult nights they had weathered together, and the authentic relationships they had built from the ground up. "None," Jake said, and he meant it completely. "Not a single one." Amy smiled and leaned against him as they reached their car. "Good," she said, "because I'm proud of us. I'm proud of the choice we made and the people we've become because of it. As they drove home through their quiet neighborhood, Jake reflected on how much had changed since that evening in their backyard when Amy had whispered those 3 life-changing words. Do it now had cost them their old life, but it had given them something infinitely more valuable. The knowledge that they were the kind of people who chose truth over comfort, authenticity over convenience, and genuine connection over superficial peace. The road ahead looked different than they had once imagined, but it was a road they were walking together, with friends who valued the same things they did, and with the peace that comes from knowing you have acted with integrity even when it was difficult. That night, as Jake fell asleep next to Amy in the home they had built together, he felt truly content for the first time in over a year. They had faced their test and passed it, not without cost, but with their values intact and their relationship stronger than ever.